And he said, I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in, and they will go out, and they will find pasture. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Hello and welcome to you wherever you may be, and welcome once again to an exploration of Gurdjieff's teaching and other esoterica. I have some material from Oswald Spengler, Decline of the West, and I will talk about modern Egypt and begin with Gurdjieff as usual. Wednesday, June the 24th, one of our great days. Before lunch he makes an examination of us for Jane, from which Jane gets something for luggage. He calls on me to tell Canary exactly how the new exercises are to be done, as if she had never heard. He gives me his kindness. I don't know exactly how. Without it I should not have been able to speak. He carries on when I have finished. He widens the field, shows us new aspects. This is a threefold exercise. Every part must be co-eval. Man has automatic looking, attention. Every man has a certain amount. This must be put to work, be concentrated. During a certain exercise, contact must be established with the outer, while inner world attention intensifies. This gradually makes clear the difference between the two worlds, and will teach you to separate them, not look on things like monkeys. You're all going out to the object and identifying with it. Then, after exercise, you will not live in the outer world. He uses the word canning, and Katie thinks he said cunning. He explains, no, canning. Canning and cunning have same root and in ancient times meant same thing. I speak of real cunning, not the dirty meaning of the world. The highest aim of man is to be cunning. The Magus is cunning. The Magus is the highest that man can approach to God, because only he can be impartial and fulfill obligation to God. In old times, the Magus was always made chief because he had cunning. Other Magus could do either white or black magic, but the Magus who had cunning and canning could do both white and black and was chief of the initiates. Man without real cunning is man without quotation marks. Angel can do only one thing, devil can do all. Men like that are nearest man can ever get to God, because only then he has impartial justice. Some people are naturally drawn to the white, others to the black. Some like karate, straightforward, forceful, yang energy. Some prefer the shadow of the ninjas. They snake around the corners like a dragon. But only truthfully if both are unified in a man, which is a rare occurrence. But then other things happen. Higher things from a higher level. I was sitting at dinner last night eating some Thai yellow curry butternut soup. It's easy for me to see that the moving center, moving my hands, cannot see. It is an engine that was developed in the darkness, and seeing comes from a different center, comes in a different way. A mole can move in the darkness, but it is only with the aid of seeing, of the intellectual center and the spirit, that the entire operation of eating is possible. There are many parts to us. This is very obvious to me now. It's easy for me to distinguish the different parts as they move. Another observation I made this morning is I was being very negative towards somebody. And what happens is that the false self, being false, meaning that it's not anchored inside the real identity, is always in a state of existential anxiety. And eventually this gets to a state where you have to anchor this live sparking wire somewhere. You have to get rid of it. And one way to get rid of it is to blame somebody. Blame what you know from the outside, because you do really not know them at all. You don't know who these people are. But you blame them, which is like sticking that cable into a black box. And you can say, you can feel relieved because once it's inside the black box of blame, you can forget about it. It's their problem. And that is a way, just like with drinking, that you can get rid of your existential anxiety. Because to really get rid of your existential anxiety would require technical knowledge of the inner movement of psychology, which is possible. But it seems to be impossible for the people who live on this planet, who have so many thousands of methods of yoga and new age shit. It doesn't work. Everybody knows one thing. They know either the white or the black, but they don't know both together. It seems to be very rare. And so it carries on. So many people have got so-called mental health problems. So many people are doing so many things, and still it doesn't work. And you know why? Because knowledge is very rare. Talking is cheap and everybody does it, but knowledge is very rare. It is actually rare. That's why in the past, through simple sanity, knowledge was passed down from the master to the student along long chains and guilds and hierarchies and traditions which everybody hates today. The whole basis of the modern world is the hatred that somebody could teach you something. Because we're all teachers, aren't we? I did a couple of things recently that were painful. I changed the heating elements on my AEG oven, the two elements, top and bottom, of the smaller oven, which I use a lot for making muffins. And I also replaced one cord of a Venetian blind that had frayed. I'd never done this stuff before, and pulling those things apart, I have a strong cup of coffee, put the music on, and then, hit it, and it begins well. It begins well, but then there's a moment of crisis where I'm thinking, really, can I be bothered to do this? Especially with old stuff that tends to fall apart when you touch it, and it's rusted, and it's hard to get it off, and the more you struggle, the more bits break off. You start getting worried that you've bitten off more than you can chew. And there is a moment when I really do want to kill myself, or something like that. Bad moment. A few phony heart attacks. But finally, it's done. It's done. That's the pain of going into something new. That's what it's like. I don't particularly like it, but I force myself to do it because Gurdjieff told me to do it, so then I just do it. Wonderful Egypt. Let's talk about Egypt. Egypt today. You know, it's gone from 35 million to 95 million people in the last 50 years. Triple the population, right? And Gurdjieff said that all the ancient centers of culture like Babylon at one point were the pinnacle of life on the earth are now destroyed and buried under the desert. And I know that the current Egyptian government is building some new city out in the desert for government offices because they can't stand being in Cairo anymore. It's so overrun. There's a lot of strange stuff like that going on in the Middle East. And this man was the Minister of Culture. And this is one of his paintings, by the way. He's created a new museum for Egypt. And ingeniously, he's painted this museum with little triangles, which is very original. And in it, hundreds of thousands of people gawk at the dead remains of ancient Egyptian royals who are now dug up out of their graves and live stream on TikTok every day. From which comes many Taoist instructions to lay low, stay out of sight, and get the fuck out of here. Most of human activity that they think is conscious comes from the false self and is part of the law of accident, which means it has almost no meaning because the will of the Absolute is not in there at all. And the situation on the earth has been going on for a very long time and they still have not got a solution for it. And I have been recently looking at long-term retirement options in spiritual centers that I may exercise sometimes in the future and put the afterburners on and leave in a big ball of fire. I want to talk about two things. One is when you're reading a passage and you pause between the sentences. And the second thing is Gurdjieff's instruction that you should pray with 3 centers. I was listening this morning to a man who was doing a reading and he deliberately paused between sentences. This is really very wrong. The pausing should happen naturally because you feel inside that you sort of have enough material and you take a little break to digest it. That's why you would do that. You're trying to do it deliberately means that you're not feeling what's happening inside of you. And that is never taught to people. People are never taught really the real meaning of these things. People are never taught how to do this stuff properly. Last night I was doing a bit of prayer, remembering Gurdjieff's instruction. I thought I would explore it. If you pray just with the moving center, how can you pray, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee, just with the moving center, just with the physicality? How would the physical body respond to the presence of Mary, Mother of God? Well, it responds by contracting, by bowing, by sort of physically feeling the presence of somebody who is respected. That's how it's done, just with the physical body. Gurdjieff never really taught how to do it. People these days don't understand the meaning of any spiritual exercises. They're not taught properly and therefore they cannot do them. And therefore they do not do them. It's so sad. It's really terrible. It's really terrible because these things can be taught. They can be taught. And sometimes people say you should think about what you're doing. You should think about what you're doing. This is a wrong instruction because thinking is one-dimensional. In order to feel the reason of what is happening and to understand it properly, you have to feel it with the feelings and the body and the mind together. The mind should never, ever, 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 ever be thinking alone. That is wrong. And how would you do that? It can be taught using a method to make it all work together. It can be taught, but nobody ever teaches it. Oswald Spengler, for those of you who don't know, wrote a very important book called The Decline of the West, where he described Western civilization as being a kind of creature. And all civilizations are particular kinds of creatures. And in the beginning, they're young and full of energy. They don't question themselves, they're spontaneous, and they just do stuff, and they make history happen. They're strong and courageous, and they don't mind getting their hands dirty. But things change. Things quieten down, slow down, they materialize and different forms appear. At a certain point nearing the end, Spengler says that there is something called the second religiousness that comes, a second religiosity. I'm interested in this idea, and I'm just going to read out a little bit from his book. Atheism, rightly understood, is the necessary expression of a spirituality that has accomplished itself and exhausted its religious possibilities, and is declining into the inorganic. It is entirely compatible with a living, wistful desire for real religiousness, therein resembling romanticism, would recall that which has irrecoverably gone, namely the culture. And it may quite well be in a man as a creation of his feelings, without his being aware of it, without its ever interfering with the habits of his thoughts or challenging his convictions. We can understand this if we can see what it was that made the devout Haydn call Beethoven an atheist after he had heard some of his music. Atheism comes not with the evening of the culture, but with the dawn of the civilization. It belongs to the great city, to the educated man of the great city, who acquires mechanistically what his forefathers, the creators of the culture, had lived organically. In respect of the classical feelings of God, Aristotle is an atheist unawares. The Hellenistic Roman Stoicism is atheistic like the socialism of Western, and the Buddhism is of Indian modernity. Reverently though they may and do use the word God. But if this late form of world feeling and world image, men continue to experience the outer world that extends around them as a cosmos of well-ordered bodies, or a world cavern, or efficient space, as the case may be, but they no longer livingly experience the sacred causality in it. They only learn to know it in a profane causality, that is, or is desired to be mechanical. There are atheisms of classical, Arabian, Western kinds, and these differ from one another in meaning and in matter. Nietzsche formulated the dynamic atheism on the basis that God is dead, and the classical philosopher would have expressed the static and Euclidean by saying that the gods who dwell in the holy places are dead. The one indicating the boundless space has, the other, the countless bodies, have become godless. In this very century, the 20th century, I prophesy the century of scientific critical Alexandrianism, of the great harvest, of the final formulation. A new element of inwardness will arise to overthrow the will to victory of science. Exact science must presently fall upon its own keen sword. First in the 18th century its methods were tried out, then in the 19th its powers, and now its historical role is critically reviewed. But from skepticism there is a path to the second religiousness, which is the sequel and not the preface of the culture. Men dispense with proof, desire only to believe and not to dissect. The individual renounces by laying aside books the culture renounces by ceasing to manifest itself in high scientific intellects. But science exists only in the living thought of great savant generations, and books are nothing if they are not living and effective in men worthy on them. Scientific results are merely items of an intellectual tradition, and it constitutes the death of a science that no one any longer regards it as an event and an orgy of 2 centuries of exact scientificness brings satiety. Not the individual, the soul of the culture itself has had enough, and it expresses this by putting into the field of the day ever smaller, narrower, and more unfruitful investigators. Okay, he's a great read, and his subtle understanding of the movement of culture in all its dimensions is quite amazing. He's a very sensitive man. He understands the living nature of things, that even a scientific tradition may be like a lion or some kind of animal, and a particular culture like the Arabian has different qualities from the Western civilization, but they rise and fall in certain phases. But what would Gurdjieff say about this? Because Spengler doesn't have any solutions. We want solutions, right? Gurdjieff would say that civilization is always rising and falling. It's just that you don't see it. It's never really finished. It'll just restart in a different way. It is a big problem because it will mean a lot of people die and a lot of things are destroyed, especially in this day and age when globalization means everything's together. Things will not die alone. They'll die and they'll take everybody with them. In the last 2 centuries there has been science aplenty, science thrown around like confetti. Or, is that actually true? Is that actually true? If you go to a coffee shop, people talk about science, don't they? Are they scientists? Can they walk into a laboratory and do an experiment? Can they make an atomic bomb? Can they do brain surgery? No, they can't do anything. But they talk like they can. So there has not been 2 centuries of science. There has been 2 centuries of confetti, of pure masturbation. That's important to know, because then there's hope. Science can exist, God can exist, but it can't exist at the same time as masturbating confetti. And the more confetti gets thrown around, the less people recognize or care whether they die or care whether they live. They no longer remember. He says, nothing is built up and no idea unfolds itself. It is as though a mist cleared from the land, revealing the old forms once more, at first uncertainly and then with increasing distinctness. Yeah, there's this thing about the distinctness. The lights are on. Every car has got lights on, even in the daytime now. People don't even think. It's 30 degrees, it's midday in the middle of the summer. The sun is bright, and all cars have got their lights on. Their beams at the front are on. Nobody even thinks. Nobody thinks. A whole sea of people, a whole world of people, and nobody's thinking. Something has gone wrong. This week, Prabhupada, I was listening to him, he was talking about how can you unify reason or the intellect? How can you unify that with God, with religion? How can you do that? How can you unify in a spectrum? How can you unify blue with red? Well, the truth is, in all these kinds of conversations that have continued through the millennia of philosophy, the truth is that they take place in a basket of confetti, of people who don't really care. And so their goal is just to continue the conversation. Whereas perhaps it is people who are forced to work with their hands, who know very well the answer to all these questions, but you never hear from them because they're working. All that talking that people do, all the writing of books, all the false teachers, and we're all individuals, aren't we? We don't need to go to church. You know, some people even say that there are no esoteric schools left. At the beginning I was talking about this sense of blaming others. And the whole world is engaged in human rights. and stopping the wrongs and stopping those bad things happening again. You listen to people, they continuously talk about that. They want to save the world. Meanwhile, 5 new wars are starting every day. People are being completely destroyed. Cultures and civilizations are being ruined. Books are being burned. It just never stops. There is a total lack of stability, of understanding. Something I also notice personally is that if you say you're a Christian, people just ridicule you. If you say, you're serious about anything, they just laugh in your face. That's the state of the culture today. In the same way people talk about materialism, they want to understand what materialism is, but it's the wrong question. Those kinds of discussions that are held in spiritual circles, where is God, what is materialism, what is decline, and so on, what's the difference between the intellect and God. All these discussions are bullshit because they are held in the bath of confetti. Meanwhile, elsewhere, esoteric schools are still going on. There are people who are sitting 8 to 10 hours a day in intensive meditation, burning. They are burning. There are monks who are doing that. Maybe not many. From what I understand, most monasteries have 20 or 30 people in them now in Europe. Nevertheless, they are there. And the walls are thick and deeply planted. The red flags have been raised, and they are blowing hard in the breeze. And anybody who listens to this, I invite you to respond. Take care.
1、わしの負けだ。